right, so we're here today with John Schmidt. John is a longtime member at LakeView Lutheran, member of the council. He is a professor at Loyola, and it's a special interview for me today because you're also my dad. So I'm sure if you're watching on the video that you can tell the resemblance. But very excited that you're here. Thanks for taking the time. So if we could just kind of first talk about LakeView, your connections to LakeView. How long have you guys been at LakeView?
So we came to Chicago in the beginning of 1991, and we lived in Rogers Park, right? And so that's where you were born in our apartment. And we were actually going to a really pretty wonderful Methodist congregation that was very progressive, very social justice oriented. We moved down to Ravenswood in '96, and the pastor had left the Methodist congregation, and so we were looking for a new congregation. And so I think we probably spent 2-3 years looking around to see what would be a good fit, and probably visited 5 or 6 different Lutheran congregations, and really just kind of fell in love with the pastor and the intimacy of the space, and just the creativity with worship and music, and also the pretty deep commitment that the congregation has historically had to social ministries, justice ministries, and so all of those pieces really fell into place nicely for us. We also felt it was a small congregation and we wouldn't get lost. We wouldn't get lost, and bigger congregations tend to have folks in place, and this was a place where we felt like we could participate pretty quickly and then have an impact over time. So.
And Lila, when did Lila come on the scene again?
So
2005, right?
Yeah, maybe a little bit earlier than that. If I'm not mistaken, I thought maybe 2003, 2004. And she came following 2 or 3 interims, and of course Lila brought a whole new energy to the congregation, and just really a kind of a can-do. Let's do some stuff that makes a difference in the world. And so her coming was really a moment where it felt like she was the right time at the right place, and brought just this considerable amount of energy to try to be the church in ways that we hoped the church would be. So.
Yeah, so there's been some big changes at LakeView in the past, and now there's a really big change happening with the move to resurrection, and looking to the tearing down of the building and the building up of the new space. Thoughts on that process, things that you're looking forward to with this new space, and kind of the opportunities there, the money that we have from the sale of this new space?
Yeah. So maybe just kind of starting at the decision to tear down the walls, right? Because it just felt to me, and there have been conversations for years and years about what do we do with this space, and how can we be a resource, a better, deeper, more authentic, richer resource in the community. And so I don't think very many people at all batted an eye when the idea of, well, let's tear it down and build affordable housing here, right? I think people really welcomed that. And I don't know that you would get that from a lot of places, right? People certainly have, I feel an attachment to the space. But I don't think it's the kind of attachment where it's like, oh, I won't be able to sit in that row anymore, or oh, these things that are part of it won't be there anymore. I feel like LakeView has always been comprised of people. It's like, yeah, let's do that next thing, right? And just thinking about kind of from a broader perspective about how church buildings have kind of outlived their usefulness, I think, in a lot of ways, right? I mean, there's so many congregations that have huge buildings, a lot of resources that you have to keep up, but then just not the people, maybe even the will to kind of manage all of that successfully. And so just thinking about how we can be, again, more authentically church by doing what I think is really important, really powerful work, and then finding our space within that work, which I think is really pretty amazing, and that there was virtually no dissension moving forward on taking that major step.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's taken some time, but
Sure.
it will get there eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about just what you do now, how you're spending your time on the faculty at Loyola. If you want to talk a little bit about just how long you've been at Loyola, the kind of work that you've been doing, courses that you're teaching, just kind of give us an overview.
Yeah. I came to academia late in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got my doctorate degree when I was 57, and I've been at Loyola for 9 going on 10 years. This will be my 10th year coming up. And what I really like about it is that it's a space where you're given a lot of space to do things that you want to do and you think are meaningful and useful, right? And so I teach 3 courses a year, sometimes 4, and I work with 2 of our public school partners and do a lot of work with them to kind of strengthen with the considerable resources that Loyola has, using those resources to continue the work, to deepen the work that schools are able to do who don't have those resources. And that can mean, faculty, staff, student volunteers, School of Ed students, departments, the campus itself. And so for me, when I came, I don't know how people come to a campus, but for me it's like, wow, this is such a treasure trove of resources that ought to be shared out in the community. So in similar ways to how I think some of us think about LakeView, it's like we don't exist for ourselves. I also think the university shouldn't exist for its own pursuit of what it thinks to be the truth, right? Even though that's important. But as it's doing that, it's got all these considerable resources that should be shared with the community. And so I feel like that's where where my experience really aligned nicely with Loyola's broad commitments to supporting community, supporting public education. And so I felt like my disposition towards that was really kind of an ideal fit for the position. So the position also gave me, a lot of flexibility to do the things that I wanted to do and find the things that I thought were important to do, and then find the people and the resources that would fulfill some of those goals and strategies that the university says it wants to do, but doesn't necessarily always have the infrastructure and organization and strategies and people in place.
Yeah, I like what you said about university not living necessarily for itself, because I think one of the things that you kind of come to understand when you go to university or college, even if it's a smaller school, is, like you said, that just the vast resources that are there, all the different things that you can do and participate in and kind of discover about yourself. So it's not just the relationships within the university, but the other relationships that kind of stem from being at a university, and just like you mentioned, all the different things that a university can give to the community that are not just within the walls of the school. Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily sit well with everybody on a campus, right? Because I think some people want to do research, and of course that's appropriate, and some people want to teach our students, and that's appropriate. And then when they see, the kind of work that I'm interested in doing, they see it a little bit more as, hey, wait a minute, we're a university, not a social work organization, right? But I've done quite a bit of writing and research into the field of universities and their communities, and just really inspired by the folks who have really taken this on, and said, there is a really important role for the university in society that it oftentimes is not living into, right? And so one of those is, how does the university help create a more democratic society? How does the university help create a more equitable society? And those are the places where I feel like that's where I find my space at the university.
Yeah, yeah. It's especially now in the past several months, just thinking about in many different parts of the country, all the limits that are trying to be put on education. So just when you're speaking about what does a university want, and seeing the work that you do, and I'm sure there's people that are saying, we don't want you to, we're not, maybe not explicitly,
Right.
but saying this is not the job of a university. But I think if you're just thinking about schooling in general, what is it doing but preparing the students to go out in the real world and make changes and build relationships in the community. But I think, yeah, you're right that, thinking about how education is in 2023 compared to, however many years ago, it's like, what are the things that we're trying to get across for students, and what are the kind of things that we're teaching, and just kind of the limitations that are being placed on a lot of places right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I teach critical race theory in a couple of my courses, right? And so that would not fly in Florida, it would not fly in Texas. But, critical race theory is simply the idea that race has played a role in American society, and it's important for us to recognize that and see American society through the lens of race and race relations. And if you deny that, I think you're just denying reality, right? Nobody's teaching critical race theory K-12. We certainly are teaching it at the university and graduate schools, right? And I think for students, it gives them a new lens to see and understand the world that they've not experienced before, not encountered. Not to say it's the only way to understand the world, but it's the country, but one really important way, right? And so if I was in Florida, it's like, yeah, we don't want you doing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge loss, right? It leads to somebody like Ron DeSantis saying slavery was beneficial, right? And that's kind of just a dramatic misunderstanding of and lack of awareness of the way what has really happened in this country. So.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've done prior to Loyola? So I know we talked some about your work at CPS. Maybe talk a bit about your work doing community organizing. I know you have pretty extensive experience just doing that kind of stuff out in the world outside of school settings. But as they relate to CPS, as they relate to just some of the work that you've done in the past.
Yeah. So I think I did not know the world of community organizing until I came to Chicago. And Chicago historically is kind of the birthplace of community organizing. There's always been organizing, but just this idea that you organize people in their communities is really a Chicago thing. Saul Alinsky was the godfather of community organizing. And so I've been involved in so when I came to Chicago, I got connected with some people who were doing organizing, and it just made a lot of sense for me. I did church-based organizing. I did community-based organizing. I did advocacy organizing. I'm doing organizing with a new group that we started 3 years ago now around an issue, so issue-based organizing. So there are a lot of different iterations of it, but I think the thing that was so important and beneficial for me is that organizing is a way to understand the world, a way to be in the world. And so whether or not I'm doing organizing, I think like an organizer, right? It's like, what's our strategy? How do we evaluate what we've done? Who's at the table? Who isn't at the table? What's the power here? Who's got power and who doesn't? How do we build more power for people that should have more power, right? And so those are always the calculations that I bring to all of my work. So, in my work with CPS, I was there for 12 years, and I led the service learning and civic education programs. And I feel like I brought a different way of understanding service learning and a different way of understanding civics than had been the case prior, right? It wasn't just about doing good acts in the community. It was, what's at stake here? Who's got power? Who doesn't have power? What are the long-term justice-oriented changes that we need to be thinking about when we do the work? So I feel like that's been a through line for me, starting in the early 90s, founded and ran Bold Chicago, went to CPS, went to Loyola. And so I think for the duration, that the ideas and values and principles of organizing have always really stayed with me in the work that I've done.
How, when you're kind of out in the community organizing, how is it when you're talking to people out in the community is how much of a struggle is it to get kind of get things moving? Are people generally receptive, or people generally kind of gung-ho, maybe that's not the right word, but are people really invested in coming together and doing this kind of stuff, or is it really take a lot of work to get people out doing things?
So I feel like that's the one of the key ideas of organizing is understanding people's self-interest, right? And so what do they want to do? What motivates them? What gets them out of bed in the morning? And if you're able to tap into that, then people will respond. Now, some people will respond by stepping in and leading, and other people will step in by saying, okay, I can be there for that. I can come to this meeting. I can help host this event, right? But I think far fewer people are the ones that step in and say, let me lead here, right? But I think that's the beauty of, doing the organizing work, is you've got lots of places where people can plug in. If we go back to the university, we had some conversations with professors who were doing community engaged work, right? And one of the things they said was, for me to start that, I would never do it. But if you do the groundwork and get the people in the space together, I will come, right? And so for me, it's like I like to do the getting the people together, right? Because I think that's really fascinating work, and it's really kind of, you get to know people and you get to know what they're interested in and fascinated about. And then that's the opportunity, I think, for me anyway. That's where I see myself. And then other people can kind of step in and say, here's a role I can do, here's what I can do, here's what I can do, right? Yeah. So I think typically, if you have 20 people in a room, you've got 3 or 4 leaders, and then the other 15 or 16 are, I'll step in, right, in the places that you've kind of carved out a space for me.
Sure. Yeah. Are there in the people that you've seen kind of step up as leaders, and whether they're in smaller groups or in larger groups, and in the university setting and nonprofit setting, are there what are the kind of qualities that make a really good leader, do you think?
I've had a lot of these conversations over the years, and I feel like the single one thing you can't do without is passion, right? Mm-hmm. And if somebody's really passionate about it, they're going to stick with it. Mm-hmm. So in the Organizing for Plastic Alternatives work that we do, we've got this core group of people that are just so passionate, and they want change to happen so much. And, when they see people walking down the streets with a, iced tea or iced coffee in plastic with a plastic lid, it's like they're going to go off, right? Because they feel so passionate about that. And so if you've got that, then you can do all the other leadership skills that are attached to it. Like most of the people that we have in our organization have never met with a legislator before. Most of the people have never written a resolution before. Most of the people have never helped to lead a meeting before, right? So you can teach all of that stuff, but what you can't teach is passion for a particular issue or concern. And sure. I feel like that's for me, that's the kernel of it, right? Sure. You can do people can be leaders in lots of different ways, but man, if you don't have a passion for what you're working on, it's going to show, and you're not going to last too long. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess one of the other questions that I have when we're thinking about community organizing is just maybe for myself at least, when I'm thinking about here are these organizations that I could, or groups that I could potentially be a part of. For me, it's like this anxiety of, well, what am I going to be doing when I'm in this group? What will be required of me? Yeah. And so I think that's just something for me, and I'm sure other people experience it too, but just how do I get myself out there and doing things? How do I push myself to get there? I want to be helping, right? But there's that anxiety that's like, this is going to require, sacrifice on my part, and probably being out of my comfort zone. Yeah. I mean, organizers would say, we want to push you out of your comfort zone, right? But I think that, where I feel like where I've always started is that, what do I think I'll be interested in, right? And what's the issue that really drives? And so I've been really driven by environmental issues for the past 10, 15 years. And so I know I'll find at least a interest. I may not always find the right organization that's gonna jibe with me, right? But I'll know that my interest is gonna be represented there. And so I think, many people just kind of like, let me go to a couple of meetings and try this on and see if this is a fit, because I think you're looking at both. What's the issue? How are they addressing the issue? And how are they together, right? And if you love the issue, you love what they're doing, but man, those people are really mean, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? So there's got to be that combination of love the issue. So if that's the organization where it's like you're not getting fed on your passion around that issue, where's the next organization? And I think it's a little bit like church shopping, to be honest with you. Where do I find myself at home? Where do I feel comfortable? Where do I feel like I want to be challenged, right? And so, I think a lot of times you don't find it your first time out, and you're just kind of trying these things on and seeing what fits and where you feel like you can get that passion or sometimes even anger addressed, right? Because one of the things that I really love about organizing is that if you're sitting with your anger about an issue, right, and then that's just kind of like, it's just kind of weighing down on you, right? But being involved in those organizations gives you an outlet for it. I'm really pissed off about this, right? But I feel like I can do something about it.
Sure.
And even in the small steps that we've taken with OPA, right, nobody's satisfied with the progress we've made, but we can also look back over the last 3 years and say, well, we did this, we did this, we did this. We just got a resolution passed in City Council last week, which is really cool. And it's like 5 of us, right, who just kind of kept at the work and kept at the work.
Yeah. So I want to talk about OPA. I also just want to hear what kind of got you fired up about working on environmental issues, because I remember growing up in our house and just being, in a good way, just being very aware of our actions, what we were eating, what we were consuming, how we were going to the grocery store, and being very aware of how that was impacting the world around us. But when did those kind of issues kind of come up for you? When did you see it as something that, this is something I need to be involved in?
So I don't know that there was a thunderbolt moment where it's like, right? I think it was more gradually a lot of different experiences over time that I had, both kind of growing up in, our parents were, I think, out of economic necessity in some ways, more than environmental awareness, really aware of what things cost and leaving lights on. And so I think that kind of sticks with you. But then I attached the environmental concern. And part of it is going with you guys to national parks. And part of it is some of the environmental-based projects that I did while I was at CBS, like Calumet is My Backyard, and getting young people out into nature and having them experience that. And then kind of the growing awareness in the 90s about climate change. And it's like a mandate to act and be aware and be conscious of your acts, right? And so even though the small steps that we can't take are never going to be enough, I feel like I still have to take them, right? While we're also kind of looking at the bigger, lawsuits that are taking place against states and municipalities and fossil fuel companies. So I think that, and policies that people are beginning to enact, right? So I think that all has to happen. But I think it was more, it's like just kind of keep having these experiences and making these connections, and then it's like, okay, yeah, this all really, really does fit together, and it became gradually a big part of, I think, my own consciousness and awareness, right? But it's also, just frankly, care for the beauty of creation and wanting to subsequent generations to be able to enjoy and love it, right? As much as I think we do, right? And then we have no right to take that away. So,
sure. Yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit? I know you mentioned OPA just a couple of minutes ago, but can you talk a little bit about how you got involved there, what the kind of work is that you're doing with that group.
Yeah. So actually I kind of love it because it's a it's not exactly, but kind of quintessentially American civic experience, right? And so it was 3.5 years ago, two of us were sitting in the backyard and we were both kvetching about the plastics. And Barbara was saying, well, I do this, 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 and this. And I was like, I do this, 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 and this. But then we look at each other and it's like, it's still not close to being enough, right? And so it was really just two people saying, okay, let's start talking to friends and see who's in and see who has passion about that. And so we built up to about, 15 people, 10 to 15 people who have been meeting every other week for going on 4 years, right? And like I said earlier, people who don't necessarily have kind of the political leadership chops, right? They don't make a habit of talking to their legislators. They don't make a habit of creating flyers, of collecting petitions, of putting on events, right? But it's like creating a space where we can do that, and then people's kind of gifts and skills come out in those spaces once we've identified the passion, right? So I feel like a big part of what we're doing now is working at a policy level. We spend the first 15 minutes of every meeting complaining about all the plastic we see in the world. We just have to get that off our chest. And then we go, okay, but what are the policy things that we can do, right? So we got a resolution passed in the city of Chicago that will lead to what do we want to call it? An educational session in the city's Department of the Environment, which I think will be really exciting and continue to create awareness. Working at the state level to ban polystyrene, working with local chambers of commerce to create incentives for their businesses, restaurants to take steps to minimize their plastic footprint. We do 2 or 3 beach cleans a year, and that's also an opportunity for people to send letters to their legislators, contacted legislators about their concerns. And so now, whenever there's a chance for us to meet with a legislator, it's like, let's go, right? And it just becomes normal. And they look to us as the experts in the field. And I think that's a huge opportunity for people, whatever issue you're concerned about. But if you're passionate about it and want to do some work on it, pretty soon you're going to be like the expert. And then you can tell legislators what they want to see happen, because now they start to ask us, what do you think we should do about the plastic bag tax in Chicago? What do you think? So,
yeah. So I guess just this may sound like a really obvious question, but can you kind of tell me why is plastic such a big issue? Because I think most people looking at it, right? You go to the grocery store and you get a big thing of plastic water bottles or used plastic bags, and I don't think maybe more so now, but I think a lot of people who go to the grocery store are not really thinking about, this is actually a really big issue. This is doing a lot of damage. But how can you? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? I am so glad you asked me that question, because I think you're right. Most people don't get it, and I think most people think that I'll dispose of this properly and it'll get recycled, right? So from the very beginning, plastics are made out of fossil fuels, right? And so as fossil fuel consumption maybe start to declining, we're seeing a lot of shift over to the plastics industry, right? And so the production of plastics is so resource intensive and leads to more methane and carbon dioxide, right? So then the second piece is that once it's made, it really feeds into our culture of convenience, right? And so you can just take a bottle, drink it up, and throw it away. Don't worry about it, right? When I was growing up, it was like those 8 packs of Mountain Dew in glass that you would dutifully take back to the grocery store, right? So that limits the amount of. Some people are concerned about the waste. That's a piece of it for me, but it just creates billions and billions of these things. And who takes the responsibility for them? We do. Right? As taxpayers, as citizens, our municipalities do, because they have to deal with the trash. And who gets off scot-free? The corporations. Right. So they're producing all of this plastic, and they don't have to deal with any of the waste, any of the ramifications. So even if we think we're doing the right thing, and I'm still kind of trying to do that, live with that, but it's like, we just recycle it.
In Chicago, like maybe 4% of plastic is recycled, right? And so the rest is going into the streets, into the rivers, into the oceans, into our landfill. And it's not like it's going to biodegrade in our lifetimes or the next 30 generations.
Right.
It's like 800 to 1,000 years. And so all that, when you take it together, there's nothing really good outside of the convenience of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think, and I think, I mean, you touched on a couple of things. One of the big things for me is just, not just plastic, but if we want to look at plastic, just the enormity of the problem, right? So if you're talking about it's just 4% that's
Right.
being actually recycled,
right.
that's 96% that's
Right.
that's just sitting there
Right.
not doing anything, just getting in our foods, just sitting there in the landfills,
Right.
Everywhere in our environment. So how, I guess one of the questions I have is how do we sit with this or not sit with this? How do we deal with this? For me, a lot of it is this anxiety of, oh my God, this problem is so big.
Right.
What do? I can do these things, but I'm just one person.
Yeah.
Even if I'm part of an organization,
Yeah.
right? There's a limit to what that organization can do when there's so much out there that is doing so much damage.
Yeah.
Do you have any? This may be probably a real hard question to answer, but are there ways that you kind of deal with that anxiety or that kind of sitting with, I'm doing what I can, but the problem is so much bigger.
Yeah. So, I would say that the anxiety never goes away, but it's definitely diminished when you're either. I think there's some satisfaction in just taking personal steps.
Mm-hmm.
I think there really is, right? I'm not yet the person who brings their own plate and cutlery to any event just because they know there's going to be waste there. I'm not quite that person, but I'm very conscious when I go shopping and the kind of things that I'm buying and what I do buy and don't buy. That's not everybody, right? But there's like to say that there's personal satisfaction in saying, okay, at least I'm not contributing today to that problem, right? But of course, then the bigger problem is it's a problem, and the more you get into an issue, the more you realize how many people are working on it. Right? So Maine just passed a extended producer responsibility bill, and New York just passed for the schools, you can't give out extra, plastic cutlery and that kind of stuff. And so there's bits and pieces all over the place, and you don't know that unless you're kind of really deeply immersed in the issue. Kenya has banned plastic bags. The European Union is doing really well. There's a national treaty. The EPA is trying to figure out how to do it. And I think none of that stuff happens at a global level unless you have people like you and me who are raising it, right? And so people look at me and I was like, oh yeah, here comes the plastics guy again. But I think that's part of it, right? You just kind of have to keep saying it. And the more you talk about it, the more it comes into being, and the more you realize that you've got allies all over the place that are doing really good and important work. So there's personal solutions, family solutions, community solutions, city solutions that we're working on, state solutions, national solutions, international, and there's people at every level working on that. And so that really is heartening, right? Because the end is not nearly in sight, but we're going to get there, right? And I think that's kind of the hope, that we're going to get there. Even if it's after I'm gone and composted in the ground.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that was another big question that I had is, do you think that this is something that's kind of achievable? Because when I look at the world right now, there's all these, especially in 2023 this summer, there's all these really big, horrible things that are happening in our environment that are right there that we can look out the window and see, right? And I think, for me at least, that's this summer has been one of the first times where it's really out there, where you can see it in front of your eyes, and I think it's happened so much more quickly than so many people thought. But anyway, so do you think that there are that it's feasible that we're going to find big solutions that need
Yeah.
to be, because the answers are very clearly
Yeah,
out there.
yeah,
but what
yeah,
are your thoughts on
Yeah.
can we make these changes
Yeah.
in time?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like if we're looking for technological solutions, yeah, I mean, sure, some of those things like, technology is solar power or wind power, sure. But if we're completely relying on technological solutions, then I think we're missing the boat and we're missing the point, right? But I'm really gratified because when corporations were lying to us about, especially the fossil fuel industry, about climate change and the impact of fossil fuels and the burning of fossil fuels, and people were denying it, and I feel like you almost can't turn on the newspaper, turn on the radio or the TV or a newspaper anymore and not see some story, right? And so I think that's the beginning that's heading towards a tipping point. Whether we can do it in time, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do take some solace in the fact that if we're not able to do it in time, once we're gone, the world will regenerate itself.
Sure. Right.
But I do feel like that gives me a lot of hope. I can't look at the bad news anymore, to tell you the truth, when I'm on Twitter.
I can't either.
And I just can't do that. But I'll stop and say, oh, here's somebody working on this. That's really interesting. That's what is inspiring me, and I expect other people to. And I just feel like people just can't bear the bad news, even though you got to tell it. But, so.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad we could talk. I love having conversations like this with you, and I'm glad we could get one on tape and kind of get it out there for people to listen to. So anyway, thanks again for taking the time today, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
It was really a nice opportunity.
Yeah.